The witness at Event Horizon. The drinking establishment known as the Event Horizon sat precariously on the edge of Spaceport Gamma 9, a rickety extension that seemed to defy several laws of physics while adhering religiously to the law of diminishing returns. Inside, the air was thick with the mingled scent of questionable beverages, even more questionable patrons, and the occasional whiff of something that might have been either extremely appetizing or immediately lethal, depending on your species. "You think you've seen strange things," croaked the weather-beaten figure hunched over the bar counter. His name was Zef Grobnakian, and his weathered green skin had the texture of a vegetable that had been forgotten at the back of a refrigerator for approximately 3 decades. He wore a pilot's jacket adorned with mismatched patches from at least 27 different freight companies, most of which had gone bankrupt under suspicious circumstances. A crooked cap sat atop his bulbous head, emblazoned with the words, "Galaxy's okayest pilot." The bartender, a being with too many arms and too few eyes, made a noncommittal gurgling sound as it polished a glass with what appeared to be its own secretions. "I've seen the strangest thing in the entire known universe," Zef continued, undeterred by the bartender's evident lack of interest. "And it happened right under the noses of the Galactic High Council, those pompous, overdressed bureaucrats." A few heads turned at nearby tables, one of them belonging to a creature that resembled nothing so much as a sentient spaghetti dinner. It elongated its neck-like appendage to better hear. "Oh really?" challenged a gruff voice from a darkened corner booth. "And what might that be?" Zef's 3 nostrils flared with indignation. "I witnessed a human child, an outcast, no less, form a bond with a dragalith that changed the course of galactic politics. And I'm not talking about some diplomatic handshake. I'm talking about the kind of bond that makes even hardened space pirates reach for their handkerchiefs and pretend they've got cosmic dust in their eyes." The spaghetti creature made a slurping sound that might have been skepticism. Zef slammed his gnarled fist on the counter with enough force to make his purple drink, a concoction that was slowly eating through its container, slosh dangerously. "I was there, at the Pangalactic Market on Nexus Station, delivering a shipment of seemingly innocent self-replicating toiletries that turned out to be not so innocent and rather enthusiastically self-replicating. That's when I saw the boy." "What boy?" someone asked. "The human boy. Haven't you been listening? Humans, you know, those peculiar bipeds from that mostly harmless blue planet in the unfashionable western spiral arm. The ones who insist on breathing only one type of gas and become extremely snippy when submerged in perfectly respectable methane oceans." The bartender made another gurgling sound, which might have meant, "continue," or, "please leave immediately." "And what happened with this human and this, what did you call it, dragalith?" asked the spaghetti creature. A sly smile spread across Zef's face, revealing teeth that seemed to have been arranged by someone with only a vague understanding of what teeth were supposed to look like. "Well, now that's quite a tale, and it might just be the most improbable thing that's ever happened in this ridiculous universe of ours. The question is, would you believe me if I told you that in just a few days, they managed to upend centuries of galactic tradition and quite possibly save us all from doom? And that it all began with a small act of kindness that should have gotten them both killed?" The bar had fallen silent now, even the ambient sounds of the spaceport beyond seeming to dim in anticipation. "Well," pressed the voice from the corner. "Are you going to tell us, or just tease us until the heat death of the universe?" Zef took a long, deliberate sip of his corrosive drink, wincing slightly as it presumably burned a new hole in his digestive tract. "I suppose I could be persuaded to share what I witnessed. But fair warning, once you hear this story, you'll never look at humans, dragaliths, or oddly enough, fruit preserves the same way again." The Boy and the Beast. Whoosh ping. The distinctive sound of Nexus Station's recycled atmosphere being pumped through its ancient ventilation system echoed through the sprawling Pangalactic Market, a sound so familiar to regular visitors that it had become a sort of comfort, like an old friend clearing their throat before launching into a familiar story. Tris Harper, age 13 3/4, the 3/4 being vitally important when you're 13, pressed himself against the cool metal wall of the market's outer corridor, trying very hard to become invisible. This was challenging, given that he was the only human on the entire station, and humans, with their peculiar lack of tentacles, exoskeletons, or photosynthesizing appendages, tended to stand out in a crowd. He wore a threadbare jumpsuit that had once been standard-issue Federation Navy children's attire but was now patched in so many places that it resembled a poorly planned road map. His sandy brown hair was cut unevenly, as if done by someone who had only ever seen hair in technical diagrams, and his skinny frame carried the distinct air of someone who had spent rather too much time being hungry. Just need to get through the market without being noticed, Tris muttered to himself, a habit he developed during 3 years of being the only human child on a space station populated by beings who regarded him with emotions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. Get the power cell, fix the air recycler, and maybe, just maybe, Engineer Corvus won't notice I borrowed his tools again. The market itself was a riot of color, sound, and smells that defied categorization. Stalls stretched as far as the eye could see, offering everything from illegal weaponry discreetly labeled as personal defense accessories to exotic fruits that changed color depending on who was looking at them. Merchants bellowed, crooned, or telepathically projected their sales pitches, creating a cacophony that would have given a headache to even the most resilient of beings. Tris had almost made it to Nexio's Electronics Emporium, a stall known for asking few questions about age, species, or ability to pay, when the commotion broke out near the center of the market. Make way! Official business of the Galactic High Council, boomed a voice that managed to be simultaneously nasal and thunderous. The crowd parted like a sentient sea, revealing a procession that screamed, important bureaucrats with too much time and money, from every polished button and pretentious gesture. At their center walked Administrator Vexter, his blue-scaled skin gleaming under the market's harsh lighting, elaborate robes swishing dramatically with each step. His species, the Azurans, were known for 3 things: their longevity, their bureaucratic efficiency, and their absolute conviction that they were superior to every other life form in the galaxy. That's right, clear a path for the Administrator, commanded one of Vexter's aides, a whip-thin being with 4 arms and an expression of permanent disapproval etched onto its face. The next phase of the Galactic Combat Trials approaches, and preparations must be inspected. Tris' heart sank. The Galactic Combat Trials, the High Council's idea of cultural exchange, which basically involved forcing representatives from different planets to fight each other for sport and political leverage. It was barbaric, pointless, and absolutely fascinating to watch. Not that Tris would ever admit that last part out loud. Curiosity overcoming caution, Tris edged closer, weaving between the legs, pseudopods, and hovering appendages of the market crowd. That's when he saw it, or rather, them. Behind the procession came a hovering transport platform, and upon it, encased in a containment field that crackled with blue energy, was a creature that made Tris' breath catch in his throat. It was a dragalith, one of the legendary semi-sentient creatures from the volcanic moons of Draxus Prime. It resembled a dragon from old Earth legends, with a spiked reptilian head, powerful limbs ending in wicked claws, and scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But unlike the dragons of myth, dragaliths were known to possess a peculiar form of intelligence, one that had never been properly studied because they had a tendency to eat anyone who tried to study them. This particular specimen looked broken. One wing hung at an awkward angle, and its breathing came in labored rasps. A heavy chain collar was locked around its neck, connected to restraints on each limb. The council's new prize, someone whispered nearby. Captured it on the outer rim. They say it's going to be the highlight of the trials. Won't last long in that condition, replied another voice. Look at those wounds. That's not just from capture, someone's been mistreating it deliberately. Tris felt something twist in his stomach, a feeling that might have been anger or pity, or perhaps a combination of the two. The dragalith's eyes, fiery orange with slitted pupils, seemed to scan the crowd not with the mindless rage one might expect from a creature of legend, but with something that looked uncomfortably like despair. Then, for just a moment, those eyes locked with Tris. The connection lasted less than a second, but it was enough to send a jolt through the boy's body, like static electricity, but somehow warmer. The procession continued on, the dragalith's platform floating past, and Tris found himself following, power cell forgotten, Engineer Corvus's wrath no longer a consideration. He was drawn forward by something he couldn't name, a compulsion that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. The descent. The administrator's entourage turned down a corridor marked Authorized Personnel Only, headed toward the depths of the station where the combat arenas and holding cells were located. Tris hesitated at the entrance, knowing that following further would be not just risky, but potentially suicidal. Station security didn't exactly treat trespassers with gentle understanding, especially not human trespassers who were supposed to be in the education modules learning how not to be a burden on interspecies society. "This way," came a soft, static-filled voice from his left. Tris nearly jumped out of his skin. Standing, or rather, hovering, beside him was J6, a maintenance bot who had been outdated when Tris first arrived on the station 3 years ago. J6 resembled a floating metallic octopus with various tools and scanners at the end of each flexible limb. Its central eye glowed a friendly yellow. "J6. What are you doing here?" Tris whispered. "Routine maintenance check," the bot replied, its voice box clearly in need of repairs itself. "You should not be here, young Harper." "I know, but did you see that creature they brought in? The dragalith? It's injured, and they're going to make it fight in the trials." J6's central eye dimmed slightly, which Tris had come to recognize as its equivalent of a sympathetic frown. "Unfortunate, but not your concern." "But it's wrong. And when it looked at me, I felt. I don't know, something." The bot was silent for a moment, its processors whirring. Then, in a lower tone, "There is a maintenance tunnel that runs parallel to the holding area. For emergency repairs." Tris' eyes widened. "You'd show me?" "I would do no such thing. That would violate station protocols," J6 stated firmly. Then, after a pause, "However, if you happen to follow me while I perform my designated tasks, I cannot be held responsible for your actions." A grin spread across Tris' face. "I've always admired your dedication to your duties, J6. Flattery is unnecessary and inefficient, young Harper." But the bot's eye glowed a slightly warmer shade of yellow as it turned and drifted toward an inconspicuous panel in the wall. Whoosh ping. The station's atmospheric system punctuated their conspiracy like an exclamation mark. The maintenance tunnel was everything Tris had expected, cramped, dimly lit, and filled with pipes that leaked substances he preferred not to identify. What he hadn't expected was that it would be quite so vertical. "You didn't mention we'd be climbing down," Tris hissed as he clung to a service ladder that seemed to descend into infinite darkness. J6 hovered serenely beside him, untroubled by such trivial concerns as gravity. Climbing was implied by tunnel. "The holding cells are on sublevel 27. "Of course they are," Tris muttered, continuing his descent. His hands were already developing blisters, and his arms trembled with the effort of supporting his weight. But the image of the wounded dragalith kept him moving downward, one rung at a time. After what seemed like hours but was probably closer to 20 minutes, they reached a horizontal section of the tunnel. Tris collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily, while J6 extended a limb to scan their surroundings. "Holding cell area is beyond that grating," the bot indicated with a metallic tendril. "I must perform actual maintenance now, or my log will show discrepancies." Tris nodded. "Thanks, J6. I'll be careful." "That would be unprecedented," the bot replied dryly before drifting away into the shadows of the tunnel. Moving cautiously, Tris approached the grating and peered through. On the other side was a sterile, brightly lit corridor lined with containment cells. Most appeared empty, but in the largest cell at the far end, he could make out the dark shape of the dragalith. It lay motionless on the floor, the energy field surrounding its cell humming with barely restrained power. 2 guards stood at attention near the cell, burly, four-armed Cronians with neural stun batons at their belts and expressions that suggested thinking was an activity they engaged in only on special occasions. "How am I supposed to get past them?" Tris whispered to himself. As if in answer to his question, an alarm began blaring from somewhere deeper in the facility. The guards looked at each other, then at the dragalith, then back at each other. Probably just another drill, one grunted. Protocol says we check it out, the other replied. Protocol also says never leave a Class A containment unattended. They seemed to reach an impasse in their limited decision-making capabilities, until a voice crackled over their communicators, all security personnel report to level 26. Unauthorized access detected in the weapons locker. With a final glance at the apparently docile dragalith, the guards lumbered off down the corridor, leaving Tris with an opportunity he hadn't expected. Thanks, J6, he murmured, suspecting the maintenance bot had found a way to trigger the alarm. He quickly worked the grating loose. 3 years of borrowing tools from Engineer Corvus had given him certain useful skills, and slipped into the corridor. Up close, the containment cell was even more imposing. The energy field cast an eerie blue light over the dragalith, which looked considerably larger now that Tris was only a few meters away from it. Its scales were a deep, burnished red, interrupted by streaks of black that might have been natural patterning or dried blood. The injured wing was now clearly visible, twisted at an unnatural angle with several of the membrane-like panels torn. Tris approached cautiously, stopping just short of the energy field. The dragalith remained still, eyes closed, only the slow rise and fall of its massive chest indicating it was alive. "Hello," Tris whispered, feeling somewhat foolish. "Can you understand me?" One enormous orange eye snapped open, fixing him with a stare that seemed to peer directly into his soul. The dragalith made no sound, but its gaze was so intense that Tris took an involuntary step backward. I saw them bringing you in," he continued, heart hammering in his chest. "You're hurt. They shouldn't make you fight like that." The creature continued to stare, unblinking. Then, slowly, it raised its massive head, wincing visibly at the movement. It brought its snout as close to the energy field as possible without touching it, which would have delivered a shock capable of stunning a Cronian guard. And then, impossibly, it spoke. "The bond. You are not like the others," the dragalith said, its voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate directly in Tris' bones rather than his ears. "Your thoughts, they do not taste of fear or cruelty." Tris' jaw dropped. "You can talk. I mean, of course you can talk," but they said. "They say many things about my kind. Most are lies." The dragalith's eyes never left his face. "They believe we are beasts because it is easier to cage a beast than a person. My name is Scarith." "I'm Tris," he managed, still reeling from the revelation. "Tris Harper. Are you reading my mind?" "Not reading. Sensing. Your emotions, your intentions, they are unusual for one of your species. Humans typically project aggression or fear when they encounter us. You project something else." "What?" "Compassion." The word hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Tris felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, not from sadness, but from a strange sense of connection he'd never experienced before. "They're going to make you fight in the combat trials," Tris said. "That's barbaric." "Yes. And I will likely die. My wing is broken, and I have not eaten in many days. But that is not what troubles me most." "What does?" Scaritha's great head turned slightly, and Tris could see the intelligence burning in those orange eyes, ancient, patient, and utterly foreign, yet somehow familiar. "There are others of my kind, captured across the galaxy. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. The Council uses them as entertainment, as symbols of their power over the lesser species. We are not the only ones who suffer." Tris felt a fire kindle in his chest, the same feeling he'd had watching the procession in the market, but stronger now. "That's wrong. All of it. Wrong, yes. But unchangeable. The Council has ruled for millennia. They will not be swayed by the protests of one human child." "Maybe not protests," Tris said slowly, an idea beginning to form. "But what about a demonstration? Before Scarith could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. The guards were returning. Tris looked around frantically, but there was nowhere to hide in the sterile hallway. "Here," Scarith said urgently. "Touch the field." "Are you insane? That'll knock me unconscious. Trust me." Something in the dragalith's voice, a note of desperate hope, made Tris' decision for him. He reached out and pressed his palm against the crackling energy barrier. Instead of the expected shock, he felt warmth. The field parted around his hand like water, and suddenly he was inside the cell, pressed against the wall beside Scarith's massive bulk. The dragalith had somehow manipulated the containment field from within. "How did you?" Tris began, but Scarith's tail curled around him, drawing him deeper into the shadows just as the guards rounded the corner. "Still here," one of them grunted, peering at the cell. "Ugly thing, isn't it?" "Yeah, well, tomorrow it gets to be someone else's problem. Heard Administrator Vexter wants to make an example of it. Real spectacle." They moved on, their heavy footsteps fading into the distance. Tris realized he was trembling, not from fear, but from the strange energy that seemed to flow between him and Scarith. The dragalith's scales were warm beneath his touch, and he could feel the creature's heartbeat, slow and powerful like the rhythm of some ancient drum. "You feel it too," Scarith said, wonder in his voice. "The connection. I have heard of such things in the old stories, but never believed." "What is it?" Tris whispered. "A bond. Rare even among my own kind, rarer still between species. It means we are linked. Your emotions affect mine, mine affect yours. Your pain becomes my pain, your joy becomes my joy." As if to demonstrate, Scarith shifted slightly, and Tris felt a sharp stab of agony in his left shoulder, an echo of the dragalith's injured wing. But alongside the pain came something else, a fierce, burning determination that was not entirely his own. "I understand now why you came here," Scarith continued. "And I know what you intend to do. It is dangerous, more dangerous than you can imagine." "I can't just leave you here to die," Tris said. "And I can't let them keep doing this to others. Then we must be clever. The trials begin tomorrow. If we are to act, it must be during the competition, when all eyes are focused on the arena and security is spread thin." "What are you thinking?" Scarith's eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement. "That perhaps it is time the galaxy learned what happens when you underestimate both a human's compassion and a dragalith's cunning." Tris felt a grin spread across his face, a grin that was echoed in the curve of Scarith's massive jaw. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel alone. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly, completely understood. "They're going to regret bringing us together," he said. "Yes," Scarith agreed, a purr rumbling deep in his chest. "They most certainly are." The arena. The galactic combat arena was a marvel of engineering and a monument to barbarism in equal measure. Carved from the heart of Nexus Station, it could hold 50,000 spectators from across the galaxy, all eager to watch representatives of various species tear each other apart for sport and political leverage. Administrator Vexter stood in his private viewing box, resplendent in ceremonial robes that cost more than most planets' annual budgets. Below, the arena floor was being prepared for the day's main event, the debut of the captured dragalith against a series of worthy opponents. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Vexter said to his aide, a nervous being with too many eyes and not enough courage. "Today, we demonstrate the Council's power over even the most legendary creatures. Let the outer world see what happens to those who defy us." In the holding area beneath the arena, Tris crouched beside Scarith, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and determination. The plan they'd hatched during the long night was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. "Remember," Scarith murmured, his mental voice calm despite the circumstances, "you must wait for my signal. When the moment comes, do not hesitate." "What if this doesn't work?" Tris whispered. "Then we die with honor, having tried to change something that needed changing." That is more than most can say. The sound of approaching footsteps signaled the arrival of the arena handlers, heavily armed beings whose job was to prod dangerous creatures into the fighting pit. They stopped before Scaritha's cell, energy prods crackling with barely contained voltage. "Time to make history, beast," one of them sneered. "Hope you put on a good show before you die." The containment field deactivated with a sharp hiss. Scarith rose slowly, deliberately, his broken wing hanging at his side but his head held high with unmistakable dignity. The handlers formed a loose circle around him, energy prods ready to deliver punishment at the first sign of resistance. But Scarith offered none. He walked steadily toward the arena entrance, his massive claws clicking against the metal floor. Hidden in the shadows between his shoulders, Tris clung to the thick scales, invisible to the guards who were focused on the more obvious threat. The roar of the crowd was deafening as the arena doors ground open. Thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds had come to witness what they thought would be a simple execution disguised as entertainment. Scarith stepped into the blinding arena lights, and the noise reached a crescendo. "Citizens of the galaxy." Vexter's amplified voice boomed across the arena. "Behold the power of the Galactic High Council. Today, you witness the taming of legend itself." On the opposite side of the arena, a gate opened to reveal Scaritha's first opponent, a mechanical war construct from the Foundry worlds, its metal frame bristling with weapons. It was designed to be impressive, deadly, and ultimately expendable. "Now," Scarith said. Tris dropped from his hiding place, landing hard on the arena floor. The crowd's roar turned to confused murmurs as they tried to process what they were seeing, a small human child standing beside the supposedly captive dragalith. Administrator Vexter leaned forward in his box, his blue face darkening with rage. "What is the meaning of this? Guards! Remove that child immediately." But the guards hesitated, confused by the unprecedented situation. In that moment of uncertainty, Tris walked to the center of the arena and spoke, his young voice somehow carrying to every corner of the vast space. "My name is Tris Harper," he said, his voice stronger than he'd ever heard it. "I'm 13 years old, and I'm the only human on this station. For 3 years, I've watched you all treat me like I was nothing, like I didn't matter because I was different, because I was alone." The arena had fallen eerily silent. Even Vexter seemed frozen by the audacity of the moment. "But I'm not alone," Tris continued, reaching out to place his hand on Scaritha's scarred snout. "And neither is he. His name is Scarith, and he's not a beast or a monster or your entertainment. He's a person. He has thoughts and feelings and dreams, just like all of you." "Tell them about the others," Scarith whispered in his mind. "There are others like him," Tris said, his voice rising with passion. "Hundreds of intelligent beings locked in cages across the galaxy, forced to fight and die for your amusement. You call it civilization, but what's civilized about torturing creatures whose only crime was being different from you?" Administrator Vexter finally found his voice. "Enough. This is treason. Guards, stun them both." But something extraordinary was happening in the crowd. Beings who had come to watch a spectacle were instead witnessing something they hadn't expected, a moment of pure, defiant compassion. And it was changing them. A voice called out from the stands, thin, reedy, but clear, "Let them speak." Then another, "The child speaks truth." And another, "What civilization cages the innocent?" The murmur grew to a rumble, the rumble to a roar. But this time, it wasn't bloodlust driving the crowd, it was something Administrator Vexter had never expected to encounter in his carefully controlled arena. It was conscience. Scarith stepped forward, his great head raised high, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the arena's acoustics. "For too long, you have defined strength as the ability to dominate others. But true strength, the strength this human child has shown, lies in the courage to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves." The mechanical war construct, programmed to attack on command, waited motionlessly as its controllers struggled to process the situation. In the viewing box, Administrator Vexter was shouting orders that no one seemed inclined to follow. You wonder why the outer worlds rebel against your rule, Scarith continued. You wonder why your perfect civilization feels so empty, so hollow. It is because you have forgotten the most important truth of all, that compassion, not conquest, is what separates civilization from barbarism. Tris felt tears streaming down his face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of joy, of connection to something larger than himself. Through his bond with Scarith, he could feel the emotions of the crowd, confusion giving way to understanding, prejudice cracking under the weight of truth. We offer you a choice, Scarith said, his voice now gentle but no less powerful. Continue down the path of cruelty and dominance, and watch your civilization crumble from within. Or choose compassion. Choose to see the person in every being, regardless of species, regardless of difference. Choose to be worthy of the word civilized. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft hum of the arena's systems. Then, slowly, a figure stood in the crowd, an elderly Arcturian with silver scales and wise eyes. She began to clap, slowly and deliberately. Another joined her. Then another. Within moments, the entire arena was on its feet, applauding not for violence or spectacle, but for something they'd almost forgotten existed, hope. Administrator Vexter's face had turned a deeper shade of blue. This is madness. I will not allow. You will allow nothing, came a new voice from the arena entrance. Council member Tyson, one of the few voices of reason in the Galactic High Council, strode onto the arena floor with a contingent of neutral peacekeepers. This display has been broadcast across 17 sectors, Administrator. The galaxy is watching. Vexter's aide whispered urgently in his ear, and the administrator's expression shifted from rage to panic. The outer worlds are calling for a formal inquiry, the aide reported. 3 member worlds have already filed protests about the treatment of sentient beings accord. Tris looked up at Scarith, amazement in his eyes. Did we actually do it? We planted a seed, Scarith replied, his mental voice warm with something that might have been pride. Whether it grows will depend on others. But yes, young friend, I believe we have done something remarkable. Council member Tyson approached them, her expression thoughtful. The council will need to convene an emergency session, she said. There will be investigations, reforms, possibly even reparations for those who have been wronged. What about Scarith? Tris asked. And the others like him? Free, Tyson said simply. All of them. The combat trials are hereby suspended pending a full review of their ethical implications. As if to punctuate her words, the mechanical war construct powered down with a soft whir, its weapons retracting. The threat was over. Later, as the arena emptied and the bureaucratic machinery of change began to turn, Tris sat beside Scarith in what had once been a holding cell but was now simply a place to rest. The dragalith's wing had been treated by the station's best xenobiologists, and though it would take time to heal completely, he would fly again. So what happens now? Tris asked. Now, we go home, Scarith replied. My people have a place for those who fight for justice. And you, Tris Harper, will always have a place among us. What about the others? The ones still in captivity? That will be our mission, yours and mine. There are others who think as we do, scattered across the galaxy. Together, we will find them all and set them free. Tris smiled, feeling the warmth of their bond pulse between them like a second heartbeat. For the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he belonged. You know, Scarith added with what could only be described as dragalith humor, there is one thing I still don't understand about your species. What's that? How can beings capable of such extraordinary compassion also be capable of such extraordinary stupidity as keeping fruit preserves in combat rations? Tris burst out laughing, and the sound echoed through the station corridors, the sound of hope, of friendship, and of a galaxy that had just taken its first real step toward becoming worthy of the word civilized. Back in the Event Horizon bar, Zef Grobnakian finished his tale and drained the last of his corrosive drink. The bar had remained silent throughout his story, even the usually chatty spaghetti creature hanging on every word. And that, ZEF said, wiping his mouth with the back of a gnarled hand, is how a 13-year-old human and a wounded dragalith managed to change the course of galactic history. Last I heard, Tris and Scarith were leading something called the Liberation Fleet, finding and freeing captive sentients across the Outer Rim. The combat trials abolished. Administrator Vexter exiled to a penal colony where I hear he's learning about compassion the hard way. But the fruit preserves? Asked the voice from the corner booth. What was that about? ZEF grinned his crooked grin. Well, turns out young Tris had been smuggling food to Scarith during those long hours in the holding cell. All he had was emergency rations, including some strawberry preserves that were older than most civilizations. Scarith had never tasted anything sweet before, his people only eat minerals and metals. He became completely obsessed with Earth fruit preserves. Now half his liberation missions are just excuses to raid commissaries for jam. The bar erupted in laughter, a sound that hadn't been heard in the event horizon for longer than anyone could remember. You know what the strangest part is? ZEF continued. They're still out there, still changing things one rescued being at a time. And they're still friends, the best of friends. Proves what I've always said about humans, never underestimate the power of someone who refuses to give up on doing the right thing. He stood up from his stool, tossed a few credits on the bar, and headed for the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a delivery to make. Seems there's a dragalith on Kepler Station who's developed a taste for orange marmalade. As the bar returned to its usual state of controlled chaos, the patrons found themselves looking at each other a little differently, seeing persons instead of just aliens, individuals instead of just species. And somewhere in the depths of space, a boy and his dragon continued their work, proving every day that the universe was a little stranger, a little kinder, and a lot more hopeful than anyone had dared to believe. The end.